A new era of Husker football has begun. Scott Frost announcing 24 new players. And Sean, looking down this list, it's amazing not only how many players he got, but the quality he got in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, you look, Andy, at these last 2 months of Nebraska football. It's been just a fun 60-plus day ride watching all of this play out, and it kind of ends, at least for a second here today. And to finish out with 12 more additional recruits from the 12 that they had already added at the early signing day to go along with the walk-ons. I mean, you're looking at a potential of over 45 new players that will come into this football program. And you heard Scott Frost finally throw out a number. He wants to have about 150 on this roster. Mike Riley carried anywhere from 125 to 135. It kind of fluctuated over time, but he wants a little bit bigger of a roster. And they went big this year with the walk-ons, the way they closed out, finishing with some guys down the stretch that historically, the Kaleb Tanners of the world, they don't pick Nebraska on National Signing Day. Those guys have historically, in the 19 years I've covered signing days at Nebraska, usually waited and waited and waited, and they stay close to home. Well, they were able to win some of those big battles here on the final day.
Speaking of guys who chose Nebraska at the 11th hour, is there one or two guys? You mentioned Kaleb Tanner. Is there any other guy that kind of jumps off the page? Maybe a Maurice Washington?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two kind of cherries on top of the day were Maurice Washington at running back and Kaleb Tanner as an outside linebacker, defensive end in the 3-4 defense. Getting those two pieces kind of brings things over the top. They added some other guys on signing day, good players, good need guys. But I look at Washington, I look at Tanner as kind of late difference makers that give you something, a running back. And you think about the running back position this past year. Statistically, this was the worst year we've seen from a running back position in the modern day history of Nebraska football. So to add potentially 3 more guys at that position, I think it's going to go a long way.
Is there a position that jumps off the page when looking at this group of recruits and say, man, Nebraska got better at this position?
Well, I think the skill position, just adding the number of receivers and running backs they've added to this football team. I don't know if it's 7 between the two position groups they're going to add here. 4 receivers, 3 running back guys. I know one of those running backs is an athlete. So you add 7-8 guys to those position groups, and then in the secondary to get some quality defensive backs like a C.J. Smith, like a Cam Jones. Those were the 2 that they really had to hit. Scott Frost talked about, man, the numbers at receiver and the numbers at defensive back are in shambles. We have to get more guys in those positions, and I think they did a great job closing that out.
Yeah, they added 5 defensive backs, and Scott Frost saying at the podium, when you're 4-8, you have a lot of holes to fill. What are some of the holes that still need to be addressed as we move forward in the next year or so?
What was interesting is how they kind of kept growing that recruiting class. I mean, Mike Riley thought they were only going to take 16, 17, maybe 18 recruits. They got it at 24, and that's not counting Breon Dixon's number on there. That's not counting Noah Vedral as a transfer. So they really added 26 guys that are scholarship-level players in 1 year on top of the walk-ons. But going forward, Andy, I still think offensive line's in need. They need more tackles. They don't have, in my opinion, enough depth at that position, enough experience. Losing Nick Gates, I think, was big. You would have just liked to have had that veteran tackle presence to give that position another year to get more guys. And now you're going to go into it with Brendan Hymas, Matt Farniak, probably your top 2 tackles. Behind them, it's a huge drop-off. So they need more tackles, and they're going to need more guys and get to the quarterback. I mean, those, to me, still continue to be the need, and they've really been a need for about 3 years.
And as we move forward in closing, this new way of doing recruiting with half of this, more than half actually, the new early signing period in December and then the traditional signing period in February. How do you think it went, and how do you think it was received?
Well, I didn't know this number until Coach Frost mentioned it, but he said 91% of the Power 5 spots were spoken for on December 20th. That's quite a number. I didn't realize it was that high. I thought it was more about 80, but when you see that number, I think it will go down. I think every guy kind of panicked a little bit, whether it was recruits and coaches, thinking the seats at the table are going to fill up, and everybody wants to get a spot at a table before they fill up. So a lot of guys maybe signed in December that you may not sign in December down the road as we learn more about this process. But I think it benefited Nebraska to have 12 spots because I still think there were a lot of quality guys that were looking for places to go and not everybody had a spot for him because of the mad rush of 91% of the spots filling on December 20th.
Yeah, it's a brave new world in recruiting, a brave new world in Nebraska football. Scott Frost takes over. Next up, the beginning of spring practice. They're going to do one practice before spring break, do the rest after spring break, leading up to the spring game, which is now a sellout. That spring game is on Saturday, April 21st at 11 a.m.